Hello, me. Oh, and others. What's up? Happy Saturday. Just gonna give it a second and dive in. But hello, everybody, and welcome. Saturday night, YouTube. I'm gonna do my 10 most frequently asked questions. I went through my latest 250 DMs and took a list of them all, but also here for anybody and everybody with questions. Happy to go through them and talk about them together. Um, I'm going to start with some of the stuff from the middle. Some of the big ones are all strike related. I was just going to sort of start with some of it in the middle and go through it because I think they're sort of interesting. One of the biggest questions I've been asked in the last few days is, what are the picket lines like? The picket lines have been really fun and interesting, and I know they weren't designed to be that way, but they are. And I know that's made some people really annoyed, but there's nothing you can do about it. The sense of fun, I think, is just coming out of a sense of camaraderie of people seeing each other who don't really know each other, but sort of know each other from Twitter or reputation or just from watching their stuff. And then to be around a atmosphere of a bunch of people who kind of do the same job and play at the same level and all that kind of stuff has been really interesting to just stop and recognize a face and say hey for a few minutes and get to know each other and make plans to get together in the future to sit down and talk. Probably 30% of which will happen, but that's just a good ratio anyway. But the picket lines have been really full of solidarity, which I guess is what you would expect from a from a strike. But for a bunch of nerds who are used to sitting alone in places or in small groups and working together, everybody seems to be, for the most part, playing well together and all that stuff. On one day last Friday, oh yes, Ken, thank you. On one day last Friday, I bumped into Kirk Moore and Kira Jones and Danny Fernandez and Meredith Averill and a ton of people that I just, hadn't seen for years or who knew only from online or reputation and got to meet. And it was just really, it's just been so nice to get to know those people. There's worst possible circumstances to get to know it, but the best possible result. And one of the other questions that came out of that people have been asking is like, why the party atmosphere out there, why it seems that way. And I think it's really related to what I just said. The party atmosphere has come out of the idea that for people who are pretty much introverts for the most part, even though some of us are extroverted introverts, but for people who are for the most part introverts, to sort of see each other in faces they know and get attached to work that they know, walking by and everything. It's not that anybody in the world is excited to be on strike, or it's not that anybody would rather not be there holding signs and having cars sort of get angry at you like at Universal where it's been a few days. But it's mostly just the idea that you don't see each other and you don't know each other really that well, other than the people that you've worked with or met obliquely. But you don't really get to know each other, and it's a chance for everybody to sort of get together. And like I said, there's a really interesting release in just being surrounded by a bunch of people who are like you. It's sort of like the feeling of coming to Los Angeles in the first place, which is sort of like you're the offbeat nerd in your hometown who's into a million things that nobody else seems to be into, and then you move here and you find out it's an entire city full of people just like you, and it's like, oh my goodness, like we're all very 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 different but exactly the same and have the same experiences just apart. And I think that's the feeling that's going on here at the picket lines, and it's given off a sense of party atmosphere, even though I think people are really here for serious business and are taking it seriously. I'm really surprised to see how many people are committed to showing up and doing things. And I've seen some of these theme days criticized, and I just got to say that's crazy. Those theme days are keeping people going and giving people good motivation to show up and sort of setting a tone for a day and things like that. And I think they're great. Anything that gets people to show up is fantastic. And I know the coordinators at these places are a little overwhelmed right now, and it's probably hard to put up with some of that stuff. But whatever gets people to show up and show such a big, like a show of solidarity is the most important thing. The first question we did was what are the picket lines like? Whatever that a little, we can do more later if you got questions. And I'm happy any questions you drop in the chat, I'll answer. Then it was why the party atmosphere out there. Said, it's because people aren't used to seeing each other. The other one that I've been getting a lot lately is like, why the pre-WGSA disdain? This one's a little darker and a little weirder, and I don't like it nearly as much as the first two questions. But I mean, fear, maybe. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but with this strike happening, what's happened when these strikes go down, or any sort of big change during this time, or historically like this, like when everybody fired their agents or when COVID lockdown and all those things, the deck gets reshuffled again. The deck of the business gets reshuffled and everything is back up in the air, and the results are unknown after that. So I think a lot of people are on edge already. And then, what they see out there is a fear of a bunch of really talented and motivated people looking to come and stake out their own place in this industry. And some people are of the feeling that there's like a finite set of, opportunities here. And I get that that's true, but I think that that doesn't mean that more and more people don't show up and claw and work their way toward those opportunities and make their things happen. So there's just a general fear out there. I was a history student, and like one of the things I always learned that just made me laugh is sort of the descendant of some of these people is that, like, the Irish and the Italian immigrants came here at the beginning of the last century to this country, and the minute they got here after fleeing their own desperate situations, they wanted to close the door behind them and make sure that nobody else could ever come after them. And it's like, that's how I feel about some people as they cross over to the WGA. It's like beforehand, they're all altruistic and socialistic and of a team. And then once you get in, you're like, oh, I better take care of me. I better shore myself up and be careful. So it creates a culture of fear to people. And that's really what you see when you see something like weirdness about pre-WGA or something like that. And yeah, I mean, I see the insecurity of people who know they're mediocre. I mean, by the same token, you hear from everybody how everybody inside thinks they're mediocre a lot of the time and this and that. And apparently, sometimes you're even stranger if you don't think that you're not mediocre. So it's hard to say. But yes, underlying, I think there's a fear of losing their position or losing some perceived place in line. But the real reality of this business for 90% of the people who work in it is you're reinventing the wheel of what makes you valuable just about every single time. And I think there'll be more of those soon. Because I'm going to circle back now to the top of the list. If you've just gotten here in the last minute, I'm going through my top 10 sort of most frequently asked questions from people online. I've been going through the DMs and looking at stuff, several hundred of them. And here we are. And I can circle back to some of these at the end because might have sort of missed them. But the big ones lately have just been about the strike. And I just want to say, I'm going to talk about this stuff here. And I'd love to go through it. But I really have this idea that for the future times, I mean, barring some big situation to talk about, that for future times, it would be really fun to be able to come here and talk technique or talk preparations for the future or things that we could all be doing now to make ourselves better for when it ends, as opposed to just the sort of oral doom scrolling that I don't know that is really good for any of us. You know what I mean? So I feel like this might be a place where we can sort of talk about some of the positive stuff too. But before we do, here's the big four strike questions. When will it end? Well, anybody who tells you they know when it ends is crazy. Nobody really knows. The future is unwritten. You know what I mean? There's nobody who can really foresee that kind of stuff completely. That being said, I think it's going to end when, after 100 days, when they're able to force, just me, in my opinion, I think they'll wait 100 days and force majeure their way out of hundreds of millions of dollars of overhead deals that are costing them a ton of money, and then they'll parlay those savings into paying most of what everybody's asking for now. And that's how it'll move forward. I also think it's there, you're going to need the Directors Guild to get involved, and you're going to need SAG to get involved before anything substantive really happens, because they're in an entrenched position and they know that there's going to be three organizations ganging up on them soon, and they're going to wait and they're going to consolidate. And if I had to guess, everybody's perception in the world is that the SAG people are always the strongest because they're stars. But historically, for me, it's always felt like the DGA was the strongest one out there and the one most apt to sort of set the tone. And I think that they'll really deal with them most likely first in a lot of ways before they get around to us. Or it'll be, they'll cut a deal sort of equitably amongst the three groups that'll be divided up. But I really don't think it's going to happen for another, however long it takes to get to 100 days, and they're able to force majeure their way out of those contracts. Ken Blackwell, hey Ken. So we're doing this YouTube channel now, and we're moving on to do videos, and been working to recruit Ken onto the team. So really need him here to be helpful. So there we go. I went after the person I wanted and got him. But I think that's really what's going on. Is at this point they're going to entrench in and look at it as a way to empty all those deals, because the owners now are tech people and they're beholden to a Wall Street bottom line. And if any one of us who studied the history of entertainment knows, it was never a big bottom line business. It was never something where you could predictably pull profits from. It was a businesses put together by people who were really passionate about making the stuff and happen to hit really big sometimes and become moderate tycoons. But even then they were 30, 70 in success to failure. And we're usually just keeping ahead, and usually plowed most of what they had back into making the things and back into the industry itself. And if there's a whole new group of owners whose only interest is how much they can extract from the industry, they're going to look at fundamentally changing the way that we do business. So I agree with what a lot of people are saying. Right now is the time where if people don't stand up, there's an existential change in the, in the way that business is going to be done in the future. But I also believe that given the state of the world right now, they can't lose directors and actors. They might feel like they can lose writers on a certain level because they figure that they can always be replaced. But I just don't think that they can afford to ever fully lose the directors or the actors. Directors, to me, most often are what studios and entities put their money behind and put their faith in when it's going to come to actually going to make something. Beyond a writer's room, beyond buying a script, beyond any of that stuff, quite often it's a director that convinces people to go ahead and put the money into it, and that's where they trust it. The other one that I get asked constantly is, what can I do? Like, what can everybody out there be doing during this time? First, in terms of work, second, in terms of support. Same answer for both to start with, which is exactly what the WGA says. You know what I mean? They've been pretty specific about what they think that everybody should and shouldn't do, and it sounds like the basics are not provide not provide materials to anybody who can go make them and profit from them as they're part of that big organization that we're dealing with. Which really essentially means shut her down. You know what I mean? In terms of moving things and marketing things. I know that there's like nothing wrong with going to agents and entertainment lawyers because they don't produce. And it's like, I've heard a lot of people say that they don't want to exercise that loophole because they're afraid that it's going to violate the spirit of something or whatever, but it's really not. It's outside of the purview of marketing those things. And the fear, you see all that talk of scabs and everything that was going on for so long, and pre-WGA people who would go out there and scab. These opportunities don't exist. There's nothing that gets sold or made without a WGA contract or a DGA contract or those things. There's really almost nothing. 93 or 97% of everything. It doesn't happen like that. So the idea that anybody even could go out there and technically scab by selling something just didn't really exist. So everybody's just got their backs in a corner. Everybody's got their hackles up, and everybody's scared. What can you do to support? But besides what people say, and I've heard some people say that they didn't feel welcome out there in the lines, but I've never personally seen anybody not be totally welcomed and embraced who comes. I know that everybody I've talked to out there really appreciates the help, and especially as we move into the summer, if it goes that long, which obviously I hope it doesn't, but if it does, as we move into the summer, it's going to be harder and harder to populate out there. And I think it would be nice just to have all the support that we can get. Before I was a member of this union, I was a fan and I wanted to be a part of it, and aspired to be for 8 or 9 years before I was able to make it in. And I appreciated what they did, and I knew the history of it and all those things. And then when you get in, you get more focused on work and everything for a long time, and you mostly back away. But what you can do to support is show up like that. I don't think that they need stuff like donations for this or that and stuff like that. I think you should save your money for your own futures and your own careers and all that stuff. I don't think anybody sort of needs that stuff out there. It's really sweet when like well-paid intra-industry people send their food truck or send their coffee truck or everything. That's super lovely and appreciated. But I really don't think that any sort of pre-WGA people out there, or just writers who haven't done their haven't gotten fully in yet, need to worry about stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's very sweet. The snacks thing, yes, I totally get it, but it's like if I was going to go there and I was going to do a gesture like that, which was pretty cool, I would grab a bunch of things that people can't complain about. Everybody gets upset about the sugar and the starch and this and the that. I don't know. I'd grab a bunch of fruit or something, or just something sort of not, we're writers. Everybody's got their crazy, everybody's got their individual food needs based on our perceptions of how our bodies work and all that stuff. We're a very worrisome group. I've recently had to go off the pizza because I just can't handle the tomato sauce anymore. It's distressing, but I don't know what life looks like on this side of the equation, but here we are. So that's when will it end? That's what can you do, and what can't you do within that? Two more positive things. I keep getting asked, what's the future look like? I think, the future is unwritten, as the great Joe Stromer once said. But like I said earlier, right now, what's happening with any sort of interruption of service between the status quo and the system, Now that there's this interruption of service, what's really happened is that the deck has been reshuffled, and opportunity is available again, because what everybody who's been in this job for a long time knows, and I went through that 2007-8 strike and everything. What everybody who's been in this thing for a long time knows is that after an interruption of service, when you come back, it's not exactly the same industry that you left. And there's always a reshuffling of the deck and a sort of a resetting of how things are. And a lot of times you'll discover that people who were really on a roll or cruising along are sort of upended by this, and other people who sort of weren't able to break in or hadn't gotten there yet are able to get some opportunities and things. So I wouldn't look at it as the worst thing. The real reality is real reality. Strange concept, but you have to say that now in 2023 apparently. But the real reality is um, it's always very, very difficult, and there's always huge barriers to getting anything done and huge reasons not to do anything. And there's never been a time in the industry when people could just sit back and go, wow, it's on cruise control now and everything's just happening. You get pockets of that, and waves of that in individual careers. But as an industry, it's very rarely do you hear anybody go, wow, it's a really easy market out there. And the last time it was 6, 7 years ago at the very beginning of the Netflix boom and the streaming boom, when everybody was in their cowboy phase and really acquiring almost everything. That was the last time you'd hear people going shooting ducks, you know what I mean? But now it's sort of back to the old, hey, it's really difficult to push anything through the system and to get everything done and move it forward. And the real reality is that is really how it is 90% of the time, that the industry has always operated. And each new generation successively believes they're there at the end, and each new generation successively believes that it's harder now than it was before. And it's like, some ways it gets easier, some ways it gets harder. It always seems to even out. Why would older writers say it's easier now? Because there's 200 venues to go sell to instead of 7. You know what I mean? As it used to be. Why would new writers say that it's harder now? Because there's a rollback in the way that scripts and screenwriters are appreciated in the entire process. And even the biggest of the big can be marginalized within their own deals and not necessarily retain control of their own TV shows for a long period of time. So, if both sides think the other one has it easier than they did, chances are it's probably pretty even, and that it's never easy. So as long as you set yourself in a mindset to say, the future isn't going to be easy, because neither were the past and the present. But as long as you keep yourself in that mindset, there's opportunities ahead now, to go out there and prove your individual value within this industry as it's reshaped. And really, when I say reshaped, I mean it. The industry got reshaped after everybody fired their agents. The industry got reshaped by COVID. I was talking to a friend in the industry on Friday, and she was saying that in her entire career, there's never been a normal phase, and I just didn't really want to tell her like that's because there's never such a thing as a normal phase. There's always something coming to bite you in the ass. All right, any questions that anybody has, please drop in there. I'm going to run through a couple more. I think this is a really key one for everybody who's probably here tonight and anybody who will future listen, which is how do I keep busy during this strike? Like you, not me. You know what I mean? How does one keep busy? And I thought about this a lot today, and I was talking to Marcia about it earlier. And my really number one thought and piece of advice to everybody during this time would be to go back and look at your top line piece or your top line 2 pieces that you have in your repertoire and revisit them now with some distance from the time that you originally wrote them, and look at them with a critical eye and really dive in and give it a chance to really genuinely rewrite your stuff as though you were a new writer being brought onto a pre-existing project as an assignment to go fix it. Like, go sit and read it and chart it and analyze it and figure out how you'd pitch on it as a job and the things you do to it, and then do those things to it. And you'll come out of this thing with your previous A material polished even further, in a way that this opportunity of having this time without it popping up, you may not have gone back and revisited and really fine-tune those things. So maybe take a look at that and look at the things that you got and figure out how to really put them together to their like A-shaped form. I feel like right now, any one of us who were to dive into something new and start that, that strike spec and all those things, there's just a lot of rough feelings out there right now. You can feel it from the, WGA writers. You can feel it from the pre-WGA writers. It's like, there's not a feeling right now of, hey, let me dive into this and get lost in this world. There's a feeling of, hey, my world is bruised and injured, and I don't really feel a way to connect with it right now. And maybe revisiting your own greatest hits are a really great way to sort of get back into it, and not only that, but really help yourself. One of the things that we, really dive into a lot in these sessions that we do on Zoom, and we're going to, do with the YouTube videos here, is the value of rewriting. And I really can't state it enough. You become a successful professional writer shortly after you truly embrace what a rewrite really means. And just real quick, since we're on it, what a rewrite really means is, first off, distance. You are always going to be your own best reader, but you actually really do need some physical and mental distance from anything that you've written in order to be able to go back and look at it with a real critical eye and be able to know what's there and what's not there. So give yourself some distance, which hopefully, if it's something you wrote before this and it's been sitting around for a while, or you've been trying to move it or query with it or shop it, you could now revisit it with this new eye, and some distance. The other great thing about rewriting is there's an illusion that happens in our brains as we're doing these things, that everything we think is on the page is there. And the reality is we quite often miss connective tissue and pieces of things that we feel are implied or are there, or maybe are wedged into one piece of dialogue or one little bit to drop it in, that you could then go back and sort of spread out that piece of load-bearing story material and spread it out a little more, instead of just being one speech from somebody or one piece of dialogue or one bit of business somewhere, stuck in there to shore it up. You could really work to spread those things out. The best screenplays take those story elements and never let them just live in one load-bearing scene or moment. They parse that stuff out over a wide range. And so just take a look at it with that eye of, how do I take big pieces of story that are sitting here where I can now, at the distance that I've had from this thing, look at it and say, hey, that sentence is really holding up a whole lot of plot there. And then take that sentence and break it down into different pieces, like 1, 2, 3, spread throughout the script to build up to it, instead of just relying on that one sentence or that one bit of business to get you through. And that's really one of the great tricks of that I've noticed big writers have, is an ability to bury that scaffolding and framework really invisibly within scenes, but never make it feel like a big piece of information just hit you for the first time. I'm sure you've noticed, like, when you're watching something and you feel it's really written in a superior way, you are building to understanding story elements rather than just having them handed to you. And that's what I'm talking about. A lot of times in our drafts, we just hand people to things with a line or a piece of business that could be slowly parsed out to allow them to figure it out for themselves. Because if there's one thing that the audience really, really loves, it's getting to do that for themselves. Before I go on to some of the last few, and hopefully before, if anybody has any questions, please hit me. I'm going to go back and talk about one of the first things that we talked about before a lot of the people got here, which is about the picket lines and what they're like. And I just want to say, there's been a sort of a, just real quick, and sorry for the rerun for people who were here before, I'll do it quickly, but there's been a bit of a weird backlash about what are you doing out there? Are you having a good time? This doesn't seem to be a labor thing so much as a bunch of people, a bunch of nerds getting together in the street and having a street party. And I think that the reason maybe that atmosphere is coming out, just for the people who aren't here, is that we don't get to see each other very much. You see the couple of people you're working with, or the few people that you know, but as an industry-wide thing, most people don't physically know each other as well as you might assume based on like Twitter interactions and things like that. You just sort of almost never see anybody. And in the first few days of doing this thing, I met so many people that I really enjoyed online, or whose work I really enjoyed. And I think that's the feeling everybody's having out there is, hey, how nice to see these other people who do this job that I do and sort of resonate on the same frequency, and you can talk to and sort of hang out with, and feel comfortable, because it's a solitary, weird job sometimes, and we all live in our heads. And it's not like, if you're in a life with people who aren't necessarily in the business too, which makes for some really nice happiness, I have to say. But outside of that, there is a real lack of understanding sometimes about just what it's like and the pressures that you're under and all those kind of things. So to be surrounded by a whole bunch of people who get it, with all the same references and all the same past and everything, has made for a really light, entertaining moment out of something that's actually really heavy. And I think it's given us at least a few weeks buffer zone to sort of ease into this thing and what's really happening, because I did not see it this way 3 months ago, and I maybe didn't even see it this way 3 weeks ago. But the reality is, now, the more that you understand and the more you absorb, there's several existential fights legitimately going on right now about the future of the industry. And it's a really important time to sort of toe the line, work together, and get to a place where it maintains its status as a great job. I don't think we're ever going to get back to the point where 30% of working writers could achieve generational wealth or something, as I perceived it to be in the 80s and 90s. But I do think we can get to a point where 80% of the writers can have a really great living and a really good job. And I think that's something to really, shoot for maintaining. I think we can eventually do better, and individually people can do better, but to set a base minimum where people who are in the industry and working and succeeding can sort of get along and have a really nice life while they're providing the things that millions and millions of people watch is not an unfair exchange, I don't think. And it's really just such a limited piece of a much larger pie. And like I said, as is obvious when you look at these things, where does the money come from? Well, in a tech business, they want to suck a whole bunch of profit out of it every year. And in the entertainment business, those profits are hit or miss. You might have a $300 million year as a corporate entity, and then a negative $75 million year the next year. Like that's always, traditionally been the way it was, up and down, and it all evens out and the people don't, they develop ulcers and they can't stand it, but they'll also love it and they couldn't do anything else. So now it's a different wave of people, and I think that's why we have a different industry. Once again, before I get into a couple more questions, I just want to talk about, like, we do these Zooms, and we're really converting into more of a YouTube channel too, like where we'll still always do the Zooms and still always do the programs, but mostly what we'll have is like a once a week, well-produced video about screenwriting technique or about screenwriting business techniques. And that's what we're really here to do, and that's what we're building. And I will always come here. We're going to do this once a week at least, and I'm going to try to get more regular and announce it so that we can build this audience and have people expect it. But what I'd really love to do during the course of the strike, like I said earlier, is I'd love to come here and be able to just sort of like have a relief from the aural doom scrolling of constantly worrying and talking about this strike, and sort of actually just plan and talk about the future and talk about craft and new ways to approach it so that we can come out of this thing in something other than a swirl of negativity and actually sort of be ready for when it comes. And I know it's too early right now to start thinking about diving into those kind of things, but I think that in the next week or two, people are going to sort of be accustomed to this new normal, and people will be ready to dig in. Also, yes, I will figure out how to do this on my phone, have my wife stand behind me with it while we go live one day, and just have her record me making these scones, and I could put the recipe out there. And I wish I could just hand you the recipe, but the real truth of it is there's this trick to how you put the fruit in and roll them and glaze them and all of that stuff. That is really the thing that makes the difference. It's the rolling and the cutting that makes the difference. So I think you really need to see that. So we'll either do a special one night specifically for scone baking, or I'll just incorporate it into one that's going on. What books about writing in general or screenwriting specifically do you recommend? Look, I think there's a couple. Everybody thinks the ones from their youth were the best ones to study, but the ones that really taught me the most, just in terms of books, were the first three Spike Lee books about his first three movies, because it was She's Gotta Have It, School Days, and Do the Right Thing. They were the only books that you could get at the time that would take an entire project from conception through the development, through the writing of the screenplay, through production, post-production, and out with Spike's diaries all through the making of those. And they were just invaluable for people who didn't have access to how this stuff really worked, And even though he was working on sort of an indie version for two of those three, it was such a really genuine education. And then Steven Soderbergh sort of did the same thing with his Sex, Lies, and Videotape book, which was a pure knockoff, but was also valuable to have just because there weren't that many resources. The other one was William Goldman, Adventures in the Screen Trade. Goldman really was, total boomer or older than boomer, but totally invented a lot of the techniques that we use now, or adapted a lot of the techniques that we use now, and is full of lessons about the industry that actually still completely play today. He had, William Goldman, Adventures in the Screen Trade. If you don't know who he is, he wrote the book and the screenplay for The Princess Bride, which is pretty much anything you'd have to say about anybody to say they had an amazing career. But beyond that, he also did All the President's Men, Misery. He did Primary Colors. One of my favorite stories about him was that he was always rumored to have done like a huge rewrite on Good Will Hunting, which he always denied, but he would always play with and toy about that, because everybody thought for some reason that he had written that script. Yes. So one of his big famous quotes from his book was "Nobody knows anything," and it does really still apply. And it's smart and it's really good thinking. One of my favorites that I pulled out of Goldman's book was, how long does it take to write a screenplay? And Goldman's answer was about 6 months and then about 10 days. And what he meant was you spend about 6 months thinking about it and plotting it and thinking, having it in your head and laying it out on paper in terms of an outline and all those things. And then once you've really thought it through and really worked it out, you sit down for about, 4, 5, 8, 10 days and write a draft. And as I've said many times, what the wisdom of Goldman taught me about that was, if you think about it and think about it forever and really kick the tires of it and work it in outline form before you get to writing, when you sit down and write, you can go through a draft fast, 4, 6, 8, 10 days. You can go through a draft. And the benefit of going through a draft with that kind of speed is you lock into a tone on your pages that is super consistent. And it becomes one of those scripts where when people flip through it and read it, they go, wow, was this written in an afternoon? It's so smooth. It's so good. So really that technique of Goldman's is one that I really adapted to and really live with, and just have to say I've always really appreciated. He also just had a really real sense of what the writer was in the process. Like, he never overvalued himself, he never undervalued himself. He knew that he was the first and last best authority on the world of the movies that he wrote, and he exercised that right. Like, he acted like the person who knew the most about him. And it didn't mean that he got to stay on every set or do everything like that, because it sounds like he wasn't involved in most of the stuff eventually that ended up happening. But in terms of being around long term on the set or post or any of that stuff. But he was very well regarded. He included in that the script that he wrote for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which he sold in, I think, 1968 for $400,000, which is still 53 years later, 54 years later, a huge amount that people would actually be happy to get for a spec today. I can't even imagine getting $400,000 for a spec in 1968, and I would have done exactly what he did, which is buy a lovely Upper East Side apartment and live there until my dotage. So yeah, his was a really great one. The other one, not specifically writing, but really teaches you how to be a writer, is the Sidney Lumet book on directing. It was really, really great. He lays out very simple and easy techniques that are really wonderful. And he really knew his stuff and just was really somebody that you could take their word for it. And the way he talks about scripts and how they're constructed is a long-term education. And to watch his movies, you can see it all in play there. And if you're not too familiar with the Sidney Lumet stuff, he's really good. My personal favorite is one of his smallest movies called Death Trap, with Christopher Reeve and Michael Caine. But he also did, All the President's Men and stuff like that. Just really interesting and brainy director, and wrote a great book. The other one that I really liked is Cameron Crowe's book-length interview with Billy Wilder. It came out in like '99 or something like that, and it really is. It's like the Hitchcock Truffaut book. It's where Truffaut interviews Hitchcock for a book-length interview about his technique. I love that book, but to me, the Cameron Crowe Billy Wilder one was more valuable. Billy has always been my personal movie hero, and the information and knowledge that he drops in that book is amazing. And it's all so subtle that you kind of have to go through and absorb the thing a few times to get some of the beauty of what he's saying. But amongst the things that Billy says in that book that I've really taken to heart and adapted over the last 25 years, the biggest one is develop a clean line of action for your main character. I cannot state more emphatically how one of the backbones of your entire process should be making sure that you have a clean line of action for your lead character. And by clean line of action, it means if unfolding events and actions taken by your lead, which makes sense to the audience and build towards logical conclusions, however surprising they are. And you'd be surprised reading scripts how many people just don't take the time to build the plot forward with your main character and tie them to the plot. And if you've ever come to any of the outline talks that we have, one of the videos that we'll do, but one of the main things to say about that is I do a first outline that's just plot, just very quickly, beat, 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 from beginning to end, page and a half, 20, 25 beats, just, run through, 3/4 of that for a pilot, just literally not details or anything. And then immediately after that, I take those events of the plot and tie the character journey directly to those events, so that every piece of the movie, or every piece of the pilot, or hopefully later every piece of the episode, Each action informs both the plot and the character. And that's really what I learned from those books and those things to look at is if you want to avoid dead spaces in your work, and you want to draw from your heroes and learn what their lessons are, one of the things that they consistently come back to is intertwining your character work with your plot work at a very early stage. And the sooner that you do that, the more likely it is that nobody ever reads your script and says, oh, there's this dead spot here that didn't make sense, or this bit went on for too long, or I didn't informationally understand here, or why the character was motivated to do this there. When you lay it in as the very foundation of your story, right after you figure out what those plot beats are, they're intrinsically tied forever in a way that people can really recognize. So I would do that. Another couple of things that Billy had to say. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard, which is if you got a problem with the third act, your problem is most likely in the first act. And usually what that means is you get to the point there where you're trying to wrap things up and you realize that you haven't properly fully set up all the things that need to be wrapped throughout it. It means that you didn't plant all those seeds at the very beginning that are now going to blossom here in the third act and come to life. So if you're having troubles or you're stuck on your third act and you're not sure how to end, go back and take a look at your first act and either find the inspiration there of what you did lay out and could see what was coming, or go back in and lay those tracks there about what needs to come. Um, that's a it's a really valuable one. I can't tell you more. And just one more Billy that he said from that book that I just thought was so meaningful to me, which was let the audience add up 2 + 2 and they'll love you forever, which really means just don't hand the audience information. Don't just spew a bunch of dialogue where you tell the audience a bunch of information that they need to have. Let them figure it out. Like I was saying earlier about having one line or one bit of business that holds up an entire plot point. It's much better to spread that stuff out and ease the load over a few scenes or a few bits to get the audience to understand and intuit that information on their own than it is to just spoon feed it to them. If you spoon feed it to them, they don't appreciate it in the way that they do if they intuit it. There you go. I mean, those are my big books. The first 3 Spike Lee books, the Soderbergh Sex, Lies, and Videotape book, the Billy Wilder Cameron Crowe interview, Sidney Lumet's on directing. There was also a book by an author named Donald Spoto, Spoto, who died, I think, about a year ago, that he wrote about Hitchcock called Dark Side of Genius. And I still have the first one that I bought at Herondale Mall in Glen Burnie, Maryland in like 1983 for $2.95 and just marked up and read all through school and then high school and college and just really treasured that book. And it was the life of Hitchcock broken down through movies. And, it was gossipy and all that kind of stuff, but it was also procedural and how he went about his work and how he worked with writers. That was really interesting, especially when you get to the parts about the scripts that he oversaw writing for Rear Window and oh no, what's the other one? And The Man Who Knew Too Much and The Trouble with Harry and one more with a really great writer, God, whose name is going to totally escape me right now. Oh no, John Michael something. But anyway, he wrote Rear Window and 3 others for Hitchcock, and it was a really good partnership. And, To Catch a Thief was the other one, and it was a really good partnership and really great time in Hitchcock's movie making career. And John Michael Hayes is the name. And there's an actual full book about Hitchcock and John Michael Hayes that's a lot of fun too, just about the 4 movies that they made together. But yeah, Hayes was a perfect writer for Hitchcock. And if you can ever get a hold of it online, you can actually search it. You just type in like Rear Window, John Michael Hayes, PDF. He wrote like a 60 or 70 page treatment outline for Rear Window that's just about perfect and like still just a perfect read for screenplay analysis. I might get a hold of that and make that a YouTube thing one night to go through and just analyze that thing and show what that man did in that document. It's really great. So anyway, those are the books. If anybody, Death Trap, I see the comment down there. Death Trap is a really amazing movie. It's just full of twists and turns, and it's so full of twists and turns that like every time you get settled and you go, wow, that was a really satisfying turn. Now I'm going to settle and enjoy this. Like, whoa, they did it again, and they twist and turn again. But it's never too much. Sometimes you go in and you pitch things, or you're talking to studio people, and they're like, oh, this is too many twists. So this is a hat on a hat on a hat, which is a weird thing to say. But I just always tell them, well, did you ever see Death Trap? And it's like, this thing has like 7 twists in it, and they're really all amazing, and you never see any of them coming. And Beyond that, it's really fun to watch Christopher Reeve and Michael Caine together. Michael Caine has an extraordinary collection of cardigans throughout that movie. Very, very good stuff. And every once in a while, I meet a writer who's got some idea or something that's so good that I briefly consider death trapping them. But then I realized that that would be wrong. All right, I got three more questions. I went through my DMs, the last few hundred DMs, and went and looked at the questions people were asking. And at the beginning of this, if you missed it and want to go back and check out the replay, we talked a lot about the strike. I talked about a lot of strike, the royal we. Oh, sorry, don't mean to go Big Lebowski on you. Talked a lot about the strike and those things. I got a couple of other ones that just pop in all the time. I get asked a lot what John Carpenter is like. I don't think they've announced any of the stuff, but John Carpenter and I've been lucky enough to work on a couple of things with him that are upcoming. And the people who have sort of come to the Zooms or watched these things have sort of gotten to know it and see the experiences it's unfolded. Like so many of these experiences happen well before anything's ever announced. And they just ask what he's like and what he's like as a guy. And I just have to say, he is super duper intimidating, but only in the best way. Like I've never been getting on a Zoom with him or driving over there to sit down and story conference with him and not thought to myself, like, first, this is like driving up to John Huston's house or Billy Wilder's house. This is like you're going to the house of one of the masters now to talk story. I've also never been able to do it and not say to myself, it is very important that you don't suck today. Do not walk in and suck today, and hype yourself up for that. But mainly what he is inventive and engaged and an incredible writer and a person who really knows when to put the foot on the gas and give the adrenaline. We were talking to some executives right before the strike break. Still getting used to it. But we were talking to some executives right beforehand, and I'm a working class screenwriter who's been lucky to get a bunch of stuff made and has a bunch more stuff coming, but just like, like a working class screenwriter, and he's a legend. And we're on the Zoom and we're talking to the executives. And one of the things that you do with them is you're sort of maintaining them in the relationship. And they're talking about, the creepy thing of the thing that we're talking about. And they're like talking about how it's rolled out and how we're going to see it and understand it and everything. And it's like, oh, of course we're going to slow burn it and we'll take it careful and we'll build and we'll do all this stuff. And they were very into this less is more aesthetic, and they were really emphatic about it. And then John was like, I don't ever mean to interrupt or disagree, but I just want to say I totally understand how less is more, but my reality is that more is more. And they just all of a sudden go, yes, of course, you're totally right. Yes, we should go crazy. We should hit the gas pedal really hard. We must do it that way. More is more. It's interesting to see people of a certain stature who can mold the way that a room or a project goes just on the basis of who they are. And at that moment, I mean, with a comment, he bought us a license to really go pretty gonzo with something that could use it. You know what I mean? And sometimes that polite restraint that an East Coast wasp like myself tends to bring to things is not what's needed. And what's needed is to sort of kick out the jams and really have the most amount of fun with it. And knowing him has been a real kick. He moved to this town the year that I was born. It's just been a real education. He's a bridge between sort of a classic way of Hollywood, even though he came at it as an outsider today. And what I really most admire about him is that he really does do that cinema of the outsider. He takes a powerful, turmoil-laden figure who is outside of the system and even somewhat untouched technically by the actual problems going on all around, but is the person there with the conscience and the motivation to do something about it and to step in and be the person to solve the situation for society, even though they operate largely out of society. And yeah, I know he's mostly known for the other kind of horror stuff, but there's this whole other version of John that does that kind of stuff. And I really found that really fascinating about him. And I really think he's got a huge future as a writer. So like not to, it's like he's known for some things, but it's like, wow, sitting and working today and writing a pilot together and some other things. It's like, yep, he really knows his stuff, and you can see why this guy's a real living legend. Sorry, crazy helicopters overhead. The other one that I get a lot, that's something I don't really talk a ton about, but I get this question a lot, which is, what is Mike Flanagan like? I get this constantly day after day after day. And I have to say that Mike Flanagan is a lovely fellow who I met when he was 19 and I was a few years older than that. and I had sold my first couple of screenplays, and he was working making short films with his friends on video. And when I saw these films, it was these videos, it was just like, that's a director, like that person legitimately is a real director. And I offered right then and there to team up on stuff. And he sort of wanted to operate outside the system for a few years and did. And then we later hooked up and caught back up together for a real wave of 20 years of stuff that I am ridiculously proud of and happy to have, and really excited about it being like the major part so far of my repertoire. It's very exciting stuff and a good guy, and you really won't find anybody who just sort of like knows what they want more, and knows how to go get it and go execute it. And I've seen it time and time again, and he endears himself to the people that matter, like the casts and things like that, and he really gets the best out of them. And like the best directors, has an eye for people to say, this is the person who can give me this, and this is the person who can give me that, and putting them together in a way that might look, like you go, oh, well, what's this group of people done together? It's like, oh, well, what they're doing is making magic together, because they're all pulled from places that you wouldn't expect, but come together as a great ensemble within this story and this world. And I admire his adherence to continue to bring emotion to everything that gets done. I think that if you're at all familiar with the Zooms and the things that we do here, what you'll hear me constantly say is that it's really digging into your emotions and getting them down on the page or getting them on the screen that separates you from the pack. People read 1,000 scripts a year in this job. There's these executives and stuff like that, and when you read that much stuff, it's really hard to make something stand out. And the only things that are going to stand out is the things that make you feel something. And that's always been the formula that we went after together, that we each go after solo. And I think it really works for everybody. And I just really could not recommend that enough. Really well deserved. You never saw anybody put the work in more or lay themselves on the line more to get there. And can't say anything about that. Got exactly where he is because he made it happen through sheer will of being really good. So there you go. Whenever faced with adversity, stood up and chased it and made it even better. So there you go. Real quick before I get on to this last one, I see the what is Scott Snyder like for those of us. Um, for the people who don't, Scott Snyder is a really huge comic book writer. Came from DC and Batman and huge things, and now does independent stuff, including this book Witches that we're in a room together doing. Hopefully starts back up as soon as this is over. We've got about 4 weeks in before the interruption. Scott is I know he's a master of comic books, and he's a master of storytelling. And he has this thing that I really like to do too, where he can sit there and sort of close his eyes and rattle off 10 or 12 story beats in a row that all add up and are unbeatable and exactly right and exactly what it needs to be. And it's like a real genuine pleasure to watch him go on one of his runs. And it's also a story like that. And it's also a huge, great, fun thing to go back at him with a big run of stuff too, and then sit around and merge them all together and figure that stuff out. So far, it's just been a really, really fun playground. But I tell you, I took a job before this on Resident Evil because I knew that it was going to be a fun thing. If you look back at the stuff I've done, everything is really heartfelt and emotional and hard, you know what I mean? And I looked at Resident Evil as a chance to go to work and have fun for a while. And it really was, but I wasn't happy with the final product because there was nothing there but the fun sort of to me without like enough of the substance. But what we're doing on Witches is like tremendously fun to wake up and go to work while also really delivering at like the highest level that I think we could do, which I think is also pretty high. So it's been really the most rewarding. And, as far as I know, there's the potential for there to be a couple of seasons. And it's the first time where something has come along where it's like, I'd be super bummed not to continue to be a part of future seasons of that, because it's something that really excites me working with this crew. There's another writer in there. I mean, there's a bunch of good ones, but the other one I just want to talk about is Marion Dare, who comes from Better Call Saul and Echo from Marvel. And she's like this amazing, like, complete point of view who runs her stories through a different filter than I do. And when we put our two filters together, it just feels really complete. Like I can go through and bust out a ton of plot and logic and creeps and scares and moments, and she can go through and take all of them and turn it into a really in-depth character journey and deepen the whole thing up and root it in solid point of view. And to have both of those things together just reminds me of what it's like to be like in a really good band, like where when you're surrounded by people and you start to make a noise together that you just really like. It's that exact same feeling. It's like, this isn't the noise that I would be getting out of myself alone, and nor is it the noise that they'd be getting out of themselves alone. But when you put it together, the unified voice that comes out of it is really fun and really different. Um, so there you go. He's a really good dude. I'm really looking forward to this being over and locking back in and finishing what we started, because we're just really on a path to do something special, which is, I think, make the first truly uh, you know adult animated horror series to go out there and really blow open a giant mainstream audience, horror audience, to cross over into this world of animation, which I think is really one of the leading things that's going to come out of this new reshuffle of the industry that's come out of these last few interruptions of service, the growth of the animation industry. I think in the future we'll talk about features, TV, animation, and gaming all on a equivalent level. They'll all be pieces that we all need in our repertoire. The way that sort of now everybody needs to be involved in features and TV to sort of shore up as a full career and and be able to go on. I think in the future we'll be adding animation to that in a way that games are also sneaking in. And I wouldn't be surprised if everything in that circle ends up under one big WGA umbrella in the future. I think the WGA is ambitious enough to go get it, and I think the writers would all like it, and I think it's only going to improve the product in all of them. And I don't think that means that a bunch of senior WGA writers would automatically get to redistribute over to these new worlds. I think these new worlds, like in animation, which I know it's not a new world, it's as old as the other stuff, but the way that it's being treated now in the marketplace, it's being put on a level with live filmed entertainment. And I think that there's an open cowboy atmosphere over there right now, a ground floor sort of a sense that for new writers to get over there and get into that world, they could be grandfathered into something that becomes fully WGA and fully scaled. People talk about the money. You do WGA side on those things. The fees and the things aren't different. Like it hasn't been like I've seen. I think it's that way if you start from outside the WGA system and go. But if you manage to do that now, I think that soon enough in the next couple of years, it'll be swallowed up into the WGA deal and be equivalented, if that's a word, out money wise. And I think it'll be a really worthwhile world to get into. And like I said, it's one of those rare opportunities to sort of get in on the ground floor of a boom that's just now happening, as opposed to trying to chase one that's still to come. There's a tremendous amount of adult animated stuff that's going to be coming out in about a year and a half or so, when it just takes a long time for those things to go through the system. Anyway, that is 9 of them. I'm almost loath to do this last one, but what the hell? I get asked constantly, what's the weirdest celebrity encounter that you have ever had? I get this like a lot. I think it's people just the whole LA thing and the this and that. And it's like, recently I've gotten to see my wife have some really fun ones with Jamie Foxx or Snoop and some just really interesting people. And it's so fun for me to see her sort of enjoy that and live that thing. But I have to say, the funniest one that I ever had was actually with my ex-wife, which I hate to talk about too much, but we lived in a sort of a remote burb here, and one day I get this phone call, like there's somebody following me in a truck on the 405 on the way home, and I was like, oh my god, just like, okay, well, like, and like I would get the call back, like, okay, they made the turn here too, and they made the turn here too, and I was very concerned and very worried. And I was like, okay, look, just drive home and, come outside on the deck and I'll just be there to sort of like glare and like, sort of like hopefully fend this person away. And, she pulls up, she goes in, she drives into the garage, and this giant pickup truck pulls past. And literally like one of the biggest stars in the entire world, who I won't name here, but like literally someone who's known by one name universally to everybody. And if you said it, you go, oh, wow. Was just there sort of driving it. And I was like, what? Like, what do and sort of got one of these and moved on. So I think that was my absolute strangest one. Some people always ask too, so yeah, it's a weird one. But some people ask, like, what's the coolest little experience that you've ever had? Just in general, there's a little tiny studio. I don't even know who owns it now, but it's always been the Henson Studios, the Muppet Studios. It's little tiny in old Hollywood, like tucked away, not that huge, but I got to know Don Murphy, who's a really fun and very offbeat producer. If you look him up, you'll see from Natural Born Killers. He's so strange that his former producing partner like wrote a whole book about him, and his where he wrote a whole book about their experiences, where he's really the star of that thing. Uh, and I got to know him, and I was over there a lot. Like one time my parents were in town, and it was Charlie Chaplin's studio originally, and he invited us over to watch one of the movies that I had written in Charlie Chaplin's screening room with my parents. And it was like, all right, I just became a very good boy. Like this was a really good experience. I will forever be a good boy to my parents now, and they'll be very proud. The other time is one time I was there with him, and we were talking, and like there's little round tables that were outside, and we're sitting at one of these little round tables talking, and Don's this very overbearing guy. He talks with this Long Island accent. He's very like this all the time, and we're talking and talking and talking, and I'm like for like an hour, and I didn't understand or care about a single word he said because Paul McCartney was sitting like two tables away with his back to us, like eating his lunch for about 30 minutes, and there's a recording studio there too, and it was just like I couldn't even pay attention to a word that was being said. It was like there's an absolute living legend 30 feet away eating what appears to be some sort of vegan sandwich, and really having a good time, and just sort of just chilling on his own, just sitting there doing nothing. And it was crazy. And then just one other thing about that place. I didn't know it until the very last time I went, but when I got to go tour through the recording studio and everything, Studio B at that studio is where Carole King recorded Tapestry, maybe the best record of all time. And it was just like, wow, like the history in this little tiny place in this little dumpy, like right off the street place, that you'd never notice off of like, I think La Brea in Hollywood, houses just Charlie Chaplin, Carole King, Paul McCartney, Muppets, just so much history and so much stuff that all wrapped up in a little package. And to me, that's one of the things that makes this career so worthwhile work and so interesting to really like people ask, is it worth it to work your ass off and get into this? And I just have to say the answer is yes, because there's just so many crazy and fun and interesting experiences that you end up having that you just never have otherwise. And to walk through the place where Carole King sang those songs, or to watch Paul McCartney with his little shaggy mullet sitting there enjoying his veggie sandwich, just really have always stuck with me as just these, and so anyway, just crazy little magical places and pockets of just little miraculous places exist all through this town. And to be able to be here long enough to find them and explore them and really revel in that history, it allows you to draw on it and to get sort of stronger from it. And you resonate with those people and your heroes from back in the day. And I think it's really that kind of spirit that's carrying the writers out there right now, out there in the picket line. Most everybody that you meet has a sense of the history of this town and feels like a real pride in being a part of it and in creating this work that lasts forever. And really, what is it to write a movie or to write a TV show, but to sort of, blow a kiss to the things that got you here and the influences that made you as a kid and a teenager fall in love with this business. And to be able to do that is a really unique privilege. And I've never taken it for granted. And I hope that every one of you gets to experience it and feel it for yourselves, because there's a really weird magic that vibrates up and down your spine when you watch real professionals doing your words and see it cut together and see it on the screen like that and everything, and see people react to it. So really, I really wish that for everybody. I'm going to wrap up as we're hitting an hour, unless there's any last little questions here. But this has been a lot of fun. We're going to do this continuing along at least once a week. Really appreciate liking and subscribing. It helps us as we're trying to build this channel here. We want to hit some certain thresholds really fast and hit the ground running, which is part of the reason that we're doing these here. So like I said, more full professional, produced videos coming soon about screenwriting topics here for free anytime you want them or need them. That's the game plan. So wonderful to see everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. Please help us spread the word about this, the YouTube channel. Please help us spread the word about the Zooms if you can. We're out there trying to sort of keep everybody's spirits up in a tough time. So great to see you. Happy Saturday night. Thank you, Marcia, and thank you everybody for coming. Please help us spread the word. We really appreciate it. See y'all next time. Happy Saturday.